In the untamed wilderness of Colorado, a chilling scene unfolds. A helpless Mustang foal, no more than a few months old, struggles in the powerful grip of a massive boa constrictor. Its chestnut coat is smeared with dirt from the struggle, and its desperate cries echo through the forest's eerie silence. Enter Ethan Walker, a wildlife conservationist known for his unwavering bravery and deep connection to animals. With his heart racing and time running out, Ethan knows he is the foal's only hope. In a world where nature can be as breathtaking as it is brutal, what happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this emotional tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Tales of courage, compassion, and the indomitable spirit of both humans and animals. Ethan Walker had always loved the wilderness. To him, every tree, every river, and every creature carried a story waiting to be told. On this particular morning, he was scouting near the foothills of the Rockies, binoculars slung around his neck and a worn journal in hand. The sun cast a golden hue over the rugged landscape, while a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of pine and wildflowers. As he moved through the dense forest, his sharp ears caught a faint, desperate sound, a high-pitched whinny that made his heart skip a beat. Freezing in place, he strained to listen. Pinpointing the direction, he sprinted toward the source. Bursting through a thicket of trees, Ethan came to an abrupt stop. What lay before him in a small clearing sent a chill down his spine. A young Mustang foal, barely old enough to fend for itself, was lying on the ground, coiled tightly in the suffocating grip of a massive boa constrictor. The snake's powerful muscles rippled as it tightened its hold, while the foal weakly thrashed, its hooves scraping the dirt in a futile attempt to escape. "Oh no," Ethan whispered, his breath catching in his throat. He dropped his backpack and quickly scanned the area for anything he could use. The foal's wide, panicked eyes locked onto his, and Ethan felt a surge of determination. He wasn't about to let this young life slip away, not on his watch. Ethan carefully approached the scene, his mind racing. He had dealt with snakes before, but this was unlike anything he'd encountered. The boa was enormous, at least 10 feet long, and entirely focused on its prey. Time was running out. "Easy, buddy," Ethan murmured, as much to calm himself as to reassure the foal. Spotting a sturdy branch on the ground, he grabbed it and used it to prod the snake, trying to distract it. The boa hissed in response, its head swiveling toward him. For a moment, Ethan froze, locking eyes with the predator. The weight of its primal instincts bore down on him, but he didn't back away. With swift, calculated movements, Ethan used the branch to press down on the snake's head, pinning it to the ground. The boa responded by coiling tighter around the foal, eliciting a heart-wrenching cry from the young animal. Adrenaline surged through Ethan's veins as he reached into his backpack, pulling out a length of rope. Looping it around the snake's midsection, he used it to try and pull the boa away. It was a grueling battle, man against nature. Sweat dripped down Ethan's face as he fought with all his strength to free the foal. The boa's power was immense, but Ethan's determination was unshakable. Finally, with one last desperate effort, Ethan managed to loosen the snake's grip, just enough for the foal to scramble free. The young Mustang staggered to its feet, trembling but alive. Breathing heavily, Ethan dropped to his knees, watching as the foal, though shaken, took tentative steps toward freedom. Nature's balance is delicate, and its lessons often come at a cost. But in that moment, surrounded by the towering trees and the quiet hum of the wilderness, Ethan knew this was one battle worth fighting. Ethan released the boa constrictor into the underbrush, watching as it slithered away, defeated but unharmed. His chest heaved as he turned his attention back to the foal, standing a few feet away on wobbly legs. The young Mustang's wide eyes, filled with a mix of fear and gratitude, met Ethan's. "You're safe now," Ethan said softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He stepped closer, holding out his hand in a gesture meant to show he meant no harm. The foal hesitated but didn't flee. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The Mustang needed more than freedom from the snake. It needed care, protection, and time to heal. Reaching into his backpack, Ethan pulled out a bottle of water, pouring a small amount into his palm and offering it to the foal. The young animal sniffed cautiously before leaning forward to drink. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just another rescue. It was an opportunity to make a real difference. Ethan spent the next hour in the clearing, observing the foal and ensuring it wasn't in immediate danger. The animal had calmed slightly, its trembling subsiding as it stood on unsteady legs. Its chestnut coat was streaked with dirt and sweat, but its wide, expressive eyes carried a glimmer of life that gave Ethan hope. "All right, buddy," Ethan murmured softly. "We need to get you somewhere safe." He rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a makeshift halter he used for wildlife rescues. As he approached, the foal flinched, stepping back a few paces. Ethan immediately stopped, lowering the halter and raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." Lowering himself into a crouch, Ethan kept his movements slow and deliberate, knowing that gaining the trust of a wild animal, especially one that had just endured trauma, required patience. The foal's ears twitched, and its nostrils flared as it cautiously took in his scent. After a long moment, it took a hesitant step forward, its hooves crunching softly on the forest floor. Ethan held his breath as the foal lowered its head, sniffing the halter in his hand. When it didn't retreat, he carefully looped the halter over its head and secured it gently. The foal resisted momentarily, pulling back slightly, but Ethan's firm yet kind grip reassured it. "There we go," Ethan said, a small smile breaking across his face. "You're a brave one." Giving the foal a moment to adjust, he rose to his feet and began leading it toward the trail. The forest was quieter now, the earlier chaos replaced by the soothing sounds of rustling leaves and birdsong. Ethan kept a watchful eye on the path ahead, knowing the wilderness could be unpredictable. Though the boa was gone, other dangers could still lurk. As they walked, Ethan felt the foal leaning into his side, its trust slowly building. The gesture filled him with a profound sense of responsibility. The trail wound through dense trees, sunlight filtering through in golden patches that danced across the forest floor. As they moved, Ethan spoke in a low, soothing voice. "You remind me of a Mustang I met years ago," he said. "Her name was Star. She had the same fire in her eyes, even after everything she'd been through. I think you'll be just as strong." The foal flicked its ears at the sound of his voice, as if it were listening. Ethan chuckled softly, feeling the tension in his chest begin to ease for the first time since stumbling upon the clearing. Eventually, they reached a small stream, its clear waters bubbling over smooth stones. Ethan led the foal to the edge and crouched down to scoop water into his hands. Holding it out, he watched as the foal stepped forward cautiously. Its pink tongue flicked out, lapping at the water with surprising eagerness. "That's it," Ethan encouraged warmly. "Drink up. You'll need your strength." As the foal drank, Ethan noticed faint bruises along its sides, likely from its struggle with the snake. He made a mental note to clean the wounds and check for deeper injuries once they reached his cabin. The journey continued, each step strengthening the fragile bond between man and Mustang. By the time the trees began to thin, revealing the open field surrounding Ethan's modest cabin, the foal's gait had steadied. Though it still limped slightly, there was a determination in its movements that mirrored Ethan's own resolve. When they finally arrived, Ethan opened the gate to a small paddock near the cabin. The foal hesitated, turning its head to look at him, as if seeking reassurance. "You're safe now," Ethan said, his voice firm but kind. He placed a hand gently on the foal's neck, feeling the warmth of its skin beneath his fingers. "Let's get you settled." As the foal stepped into the paddock, Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. This was the beginning of their journey together, a chance to heal, rebuild, and face whatever challenges lay ahead. The cabin stood quietly against the backdrop of the open field, its weathered wooden frame a testament to years of enduring the elements. Ethan moved quickly, bringing out a bucket of water and a bundle of hay he kept for emergencies. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, but his mind remained focused on the Mustang's condition. The foal stood in the center of the paddock, its chestnut coat glistening faintly under the afternoon sun. Though its breathing was still labored and its limp more pronounced without the adrenaline of survival, its expressive eyes held a quiet resilience. Ethan approached slowly, carrying a soft cloth to clean the foal's wounds. This was just the first step in what he hoped would be a long and healing journey for them both. Ethan held the bottle of antiseptic in his hands. "All right, buddy," he said softly, his tone calm and reassuring. "This might sting a little, but it'll help." The foal flinched as he reached out, its ears pinning back in fear. Ethan paused, giving it a moment to adjust. He crouched low, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, and began speaking in a steady voice. "I know it hurts," he murmured, his tone soothing, "but I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You've been through worse, haven't you?" The foal's wide eyes locked onto Ethan's face, and for a moment, it stood still as though trying to decipher his intentions. Slowly, it lowered its head, allowing Ethan to place a hand on its neck. The warmth of the animal's skin beneath his palm was reassuring, a sign that it was still fighting, still holding on. Ethan worked carefully, cleaning the wounds with a touch as gentle as he could manage. The foal tensed occasionally, letting out soft, distressed nickers, but it didn't pull away. As Ethan treated the injuries, he noted the extent of the damage. Scrapes and cuts along the legs, evidence of its desperate struggle with the boa constrictor. A deeper gash on its flank concerned him the most, and he made a mental note to monitor it closely for infection. "You're tougher than you look," Ethan said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Most grown Mustangs would have given up, but not you." Once the wounds were cleaned and dressed, Ethan stepped back and watched as the foal gingerly moved toward the water bucket. It drank deeply, its sides heaving with each breath. Relief washed over Ethan at the sight, though he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, Ethan reinforced the paddock and prepared a makeshift shelter for the foal. His cabin wasn't luxurious, but it was sturdy, and over the years, he'd built enough to accommodate the occasional wildlife rescue. The familiar rhythm of the work grounded him as his hands moved with practiced efficiency. By the time he finished, the foal had begun to relax. It stood near the shelter, one leg cocked slightly, a cautious sign of comfort. Ethan leaned against the fence, watching it with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The Mustang had a long road ahead, but for now, it was safe. As the sun set, casting hues of orange and pink across the sky, Ethan brought out a stool and sat near the paddock. The foal's gaze met his, and though its eyes still held traces of fear, there was something new, curiosity, perhaps even trust. "You're going to make it," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet field. "And I'll be right here with you." The words weren't just for the Mustang. They were a promise, a reflection of Ethan's own determination to see this journey through. As stars began to appear overhead, the bond between man and Mustang grew a little stronger, forged in the quiet resilience of survival and the shared hope for a better tomorrow. Morning came softly, the first light of dawn spilling through the trees and over the paddock. Ethan stood by the cabin window, a cup of coffee warming his hands, watching the foal as it shifted its weight gingerly, testing its wounded leg. The night had been uneventful, but he knew the real test of survival lay in the days ahead. Stepping outside into the crisp morning air, Ethan approached the paddock, a small bucket of grain and fresh hay in hand. The foal raised its head at the sound of his approach, its ears flicking back and forth. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, Ethan greeted it with a calm, steady voice. "Morning, buddy. How are we feeling today?" Placing the bucket down, Ethan stepped back to give the foal space to approach on its own terms. It hesitated briefly, but eventually moved closer, its steps uneven but more confident than the day before. Ethan crouched nearby, observing the foal's gait. He noticed the strain in its movements and the way it carefully avoided putting too much weight on its injured leg. The deep gash on its flank had scabbed over, but the surrounding area was swollen. Infection was a risk, and Ethan knew he needed to act fast. Returning to the cabin, Ethan rummaged through his supplies. Years of tending to injured animals had taught him to keep a well-stocked first aid kit, but he was running low on antibiotics. He muttered a curse under his breath. A trip to town was unavoidable. Leaving the foal alone wasn't ideal, but it wasn't optional either. After securing the paddock, Ethan left a note for his neighbor in case of an emergency. As he drove down the winding dirt road, his thoughts raced with concern. The foal had come so far, but survival in the wild was no small feat. It had been lucky to escape the boa constrictor. But now every moment was a battle against infection, fatigue, and fear. When Ethan returned later that afternoon, the sight that greeted him made his heart sink. The paddock gate was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. Panic rising, he rushed forward, calling out for the foal. "Hey, buddy, where are you?" The paddock was empty. The grain bucket lay tipped over, and fresh hoof prints led out into the open field. Ethan cursed himself for not double-checking the latch before leaving. Grabbing his gear, a rope, some treats, and his sturdy boots, he set off, following the tracks into the woods. The trail led him into dense underbrush, where progress was slow and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Moving carefully, his eyes scanned the ground for signs of the foal. Suddenly, he caught a flash of movement ahead. Up ahead, Ethan caught sight of the foal standing near a stream, drinking cautiously. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. A low, guttural growl reached his ears, freezing him in place. Across the stream, half hidden in the shadows, a predator lurked, a mountain lion. Its golden eyes were locked on the Mustang, its body taut with predatory intent. The foal, sensing the danger, backed away from the water, its muscles tensing, ready to bolt. Ethan's mind raced as he calculated his next move. Slowly, he reached for the rifle slung over his shoulder. Taking a deliberate step forward, he placed himself between the foal and the mountain lion. His voice was calm yet firm as he shouted, trying to startle the predator. "Get out of here! Go on!" The mountain lion hesitated, its piercing gaze flicking between Ethan and the foal. It let out a low snarl but didn't move. Ethan raised his rifle, aiming just above the predator, and fired a warning shot. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the forest, startling birds into flight. The mountain lion growled once more before retreating into the woods, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. Ethan exhaled deeply, realizing he'd been holding his breath. He turned to the foal, whose wide eyes betrayed its lingering fear. "You've got a knack for finding trouble, don't you?" Ethan said, his voice softer now. He approached the foal carefully, holding out a treat. It took a moment, but the Mustang eventually stepped forward, nuzzling his hand. Together, they made their way back to the cabin, the bond between them strengthening with each step. That night, Ethan barely slept. The encounter with the mountain lion replayed in his mind, every detail sharpening his sense of urgency. Outside, the foal rested in the paddock, its breathing steady but shallow. Every so often, its ears twitched, a lingering response to the predator's presence. Morning arrived under a dull gray sky, the heavy clouds promising rain. Ethan stood by the paddock, leaning against the fence as he watched the foal move tentatively. Though it was eating and drinking, its injured leg remained swollen. The antibiotics he'd brought from town seemed to be helping, but the foal's recovery was far from guaranteed. "You've got a fighting spirit," Ethan murmured, tossing a handful of hay into the trough. "But even fighters need a little help sometimes." By mid-afternoon, the rain began to fall, a light drizzle at first, quickly escalating into a downpour that soaked the ground and chilled the air. Ethan moved the foal into the small barn attached to his cabin, ensuring it was dry and safe. Kneeling beside it, He gently inspected its leg. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the foal winced at his touch. "Easy, buddy," Ethan said softly. "We're getting there." He cleaned the wound again, his hand steady despite the faint tremor in his own body. The foal's large, expressive eyes locked onto his, its breathing uneven but calm. The trust in that gaze was undeniable, and it filled Ethan with a renewed sense of determination. The storm raged into the evening, the wind howling through the trees and rain lashing against the cabin windows. As Ethan sat beside the foal, he found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since finding it. He'd always considered himself a loner, someone who found solace in the wilderness rather than in the company of others. But the bond he'd formed with the Mustang was unlike anything he'd experienced before. That bond was tested again as the storm reached its peak. A deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, startling the foal. It let out a panicked whinny and attempted to stand, but its injured leg buckled beneath it. Ethan rushed to its side, his voice firm but soothing. Hey, it's okay. I'm here. You're safe." The foal calmed slightly at the sound of his voice, though its body still trembled. Ethan stayed by its side, resting a reassuring hand on its flank until the storm finally began to subside. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the drenched landscape. The world seemed renewed, cleansed by the night's storm. Ethan stepped outside, breathing in the crisp, rain-scented air. The foal raised its head at the sound of his approach, its ears flicking forward. Its movements were still cautious, but there was a spark of determination in its eyes. "Good morning, buddy," Ethan said with a soft smile. "It's a new day, and we're going to face it together." The road ahead would be long, but in that quiet moment, surrounded by the freshness of a new dawn, Ethan knew they were both ready to keep fighting. Together, Ethan led the foal out into the paddock. Its movements were hesitant but steadier than before. The fresh air and soft sunlight seemed to invigorate the young Mustang, and for the first time, Ethan noticed a glimmer of its former spirit. As the foal grazed peacefully, Ethan stood back with his arms crossed, a small smile forming on his face. Pride swelled in his chest. This animal, once trapped and vulnerable, was slowly finding its strength again. But the serene moment was abruptly interrupted by a sound from the woods, a rustling, followed by the unmistakable growl of a predator. Ethan's body tensed as his eyes scanned the tree line. He spotted movement, a familiar golden shape. The mountain lion had returned. Acting quickly, Ethan moved between the foal and the predator, his hand instinctively grabbing the rifle slung over his shoulder. His voice rang out firmly into the still air. Not this time. The mountain lion stopped in its tracks, its sharp eyes fixed on Ethan. A long, tense moment passed as the predator assessed the situation. Finally, with a low snarl, it turned and disappeared back into the trees, retreating as silently as it had arrived. Ethan exhaled deeply, lowering the rifle. He turned to the foal, which stood trembling but unharmed. "That's twice now," Ethan said, half teasing. "You owe me, buddy." The foal let out a soft nicker, and Ethan chuckled despite himself. He reached out, stroking the animal's neck gently. In that moment, their connection felt unbreakable. The morning after the mountain lion's retreat dawned with a quiet triumph. The foal seemed livelier than Ethan had seen it since the rescue. Though its injured leg still bore the marks of its ordeal, it moved with less hesitation, venturing further into the paddock to graze on fresh patches of grass. Ethan watched from the cabin porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, feeling an uncommon sense of peace. He had begun to realize how much the Mustang had come to mean to him. It wasn't just the act of saving it. It was the bond they'd formed, an unspoken understanding forged through shared struggles. By midday, Ethan decided it was time to test the foal's strength further. He fashioned a makeshift lead from some old rope and gently looped it around the foal's neck. Its ears flicked nervously, but it didn't resist. "Just a short walk," Ethan said soothingly, patting its side. "Let's see how far you've come." They began a slow journey down a dirt path leading toward the forest edge. The foal limped slightly but seemed determined to keep up. Ethan kept his pace steady, stopping often to let the animal rest. Each step felt like progress, a small victory in their shared journey. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature. Bird song, the rustling of leaves, and the distant babble of a stream. The foal's ears twitched with curiosity, its eyes scanning the surroundings as if rediscovering the world it had been cruelly separated from. When they reached a clearing by the stream, Ethan allowed the foal to drink while he crouched nearby to fill his canteen. The water was cool and clear, reflecting the sunlight filtering through the trees. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. The peace was shattered by a sudden, sharp sound. A gunshot. Ethan's head snapped up, his heart pounding as he scanned the tree line. The foal startled, its body tensing. Ethan quickly moved to its side, placing a calming hand on its neck. "Easy," he whispered. "We're okay, I think." But were they? The sound of the shot echoed in his mind, a stark reminder of the hunters who had nearly ended this foal's life. Had they returned? Were they nearby, tracking them even now? Ethan decided it wasn't worth the risk. Quickly, he led the foal back toward the cabin, his eyes constantly scanning the woods for signs of danger. His grip on the lead tightened as his instincts sharpened, every sound and movement amplified by his heightened awareness. When they reached the cabin, Ethan secured the foal in the paddock and retrieved his rifle. He wasn't about to let anyone or anything threaten the animal he had worked so hard to save. His mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Hours passed with no sign of anyone, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. As dusk fell, he sat on the porch, the rifle resting across his lap, watching the shadows lengthen over the paddock. The foal grazed quietly, seemingly unaware of the tension gripping its caretaker. Then, as night began to settle, Ethan heard it, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Rising to his feet, heart pounding, he gripped the rifle tightly. A figure emerged from the darkness, carrying a lantern that cast a warm glow over the otherwise ominous scene. It wasn't a hunter. The man was older, his weathered features illuminated by the flickering light. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a worn jacket, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," the man said, his voice calm. "I heard about the foal. People in town said you'd taken in a wild Mustang." Ethan didn't lower the rifle immediately, his eyes narrowing as he studied the stranger. "I'm here to help," the man added. "Name's Thomas. I used to work with the wild horse program nearby. I can tell you've done good by that animal, but you might need some help." Ethan's grip on the rifle loosened slightly, though his guard didn't drop entirely. "How do I know you're not here to take him?" he asked, his voice steady but wary. Thomas offered a faint smile. "Because if I wanted to, I wouldn't have come unarmed. That Mustang belongs out there, free. I just want to make sure he gets that chance." The dawn came with a soft glow, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Ethan stood on the porch, his hands resting on the railing as he watched the foal in the paddock. Its chestnut coat gleamed in the early morning light, the scars of its ordeal still visible but healing. The foal's movements were more confident now, its head held high as it grazed on the dewy grass. Beside Ethan, Thomas leaned against a post, his weathered face calm as he observed the young Mustang. Over the past few days, the two men had worked together to prepare the foal for what was to come. Ethan had been hesitant at first, unsure if he could trust Thomas, but the older man's quiet wisdom and genuine care for the animal had won him over. "This is it," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "Today's the day." Ethan nodded, his chest tight with emotion. He had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. Over the weeks, the foal had become more than just a rescue. It was a symbol of resilience, a partner in his own journey of rediscovery. Thomas stepped forward, clapping a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've done something incredible here, son. That horse wouldn't have made it without you." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight, and simply nodded, unable to find the words. Together, they walked down to the paddock, where the foal lifted its head, ears pricked as they approached. Its trust in Ethan was evident in the way it moved toward him, nuzzling his outstretched hand. Ethan ran his hand down the foal's neck, his fingers brushing against its soft coat. "You're strong now," he murmured. "It's time for you to go where you belong." Thomas handed Ethan the lead rope, and together they guided the foal out of the paddock. The plan was simple. Take the Mustang to a nearby wild horse sanctuary where it could live among its own kind. The journey would be the final step in the foal's recovery, a step toward freedom. The drive was quiet, the trailer rocking gently as the truck navigated the winding roads. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of the foal through the slats. It seemed calm, its head low as it stood in the trailer, unaware of the life awaiting it. When they arrived at the sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of open land surrounded by rolling hills, Ethan felt a pang of bittersweet relief. This was the right thing to do, he reminded himself. The foal deserved a chance to live wild and free, away from the dangers of captivity and human interference. A staff member greeted them, her face lighting up as she saw the foal. "Beautiful animal," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've done an amazing job." Ethan and Thomas worked together to unload the foal, guiding it carefully into the enclosure. The young Mustang stepped tentatively onto the soft earth, its ears swiveling as it took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Beyond the fence, a herd of wild horses grazed peacefully, their movements fluid and unrestrained. "Go on," Ethan said softly, releasing the lead rope. "This is your home now." The foal hesitated for a moment, its gaze shifting between Ethan and the herd. Then, with a burst of energy, it broke into a trot. Its legs stretched out with newfound strength as it galloped toward the herd, its mane and tail streaming behind it like a banner of freedom. Ethan leaned against the fence, watching as the foal was welcomed into the group. The sight filled him with a mix of pride and fulfillment, but also a deep ache of loss. He had given the Mustang everything he could, and now it was time to let go. Thomas stood beside him, his hands resting on the top rail. "You've given that horse a second chance," he said quietly. "Not everyone would have gone this far." Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just for him. He reminded me what it means to fight, to keep going, even when it feels impossible." The two men stood in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher into the sky. The foal, now indistinguishable from the rest of the herd, had found its place. Ethan felt a sense of closure, knowing he had done everything he could. As they turned to leave, Ethan cast one last glance at the Mustang. The foal lifted its head as if sensing his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. It was a silent goodbye, a shared acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. Back in the truck, Ethan stared out at the horizon, the weight of the past week settling over him. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He had been changed by this experience. His life was forever intertwined with that of a wild Mustang. As the sanctuary faded from view, Ethan felt a sense of peace, knowing he had done his part to make the world a little better, for the Mustang and for himself.